I mean, one, I think, is you should pray and asking the Lord to guide you to a church where he would want you to root yourself and begin to serve and work alongside the leadership of that church, but also the members of that church. So I would say, start with prayer. Don't just church shop for a place where you could plug in and keep doing what you've been doing, but really a desire to become part of that family of faith. But the second is take the time to be known. So even though you may have a clear vision of what you want to accomplish, I think one thing that you said is, when people show up with an agenda, that comes out sooner or later, usually sooner. Now you can have a desire to bring what you've learned to this church and be a blessing in that. But when you come with an agenda, that's a different animal. So you can have a desire, but don't come with an agenda. Ask God to allow you to become known, trusted, and part of this community before you really start trying to lead. Welcome into the Harvest, where we bring clarity and courage for those of you who are living and sharing your faith in the everyday places. Today, we're joined by Shelton Markham. He's my friend and pastor at Paseo del Rey Church, and we're going to explore how the mission of Into the Harvest aligns with the work of the local church in making disciples. So we're going to be sharing some personal stories, some practical wisdom and tips, and also talking about partnership, friendship, and the shared goal of equipping believers for growth and ministry. So let's dive in. Shelton, thanks for being with us again.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to, this is a topic I'm so passionate about. I mean, both in the disciple making and my deep love for the church and trying to understand, as you say, how do these things align? And so I'm excited to talk with this. I think there is obviously the challenge. I know you have your notes and you'll ask more clear question, but there's such a challenge, I think, and I have long felt this as a longtime youth pastor, when there are parachurch ministries that do great work, but it feels like it's outside of church, which literally, you have to wrestle with what is parachurch? Is it beside church? Is it along, what is that? And let's be honest, like Into the Harvest is a parachurch ministry. And I do think, though, that does not, even the wonderful ministry, we have to see how does that fit into the larger picture of God's understanding of what he's doing and of our understanding of what God is doing. So anyway, I think this is a very important topic. I'm pumped to jump into it. Excited to be with the Into the Harvest family. Yeah.
I'm excited that we can have this conversation. Your background has been in the local church, pretty much from youth through the present. My background has been everything from home church to military chapels, to parachurch groups like the Navigators and Into the Harvest, to more traditional churches like Paseo del Rey, local churches. So I love our friendship, and I truly believe the Lord brought us together. And I'm hoping that this conversation that we're going to have today can shed some light on how we can partner together to help believers grow in faith, mature, and become disciples. I also want to give a shout out. Those who are watching this on YouTube will notice that we are in a different studio.
Yeah, we're not at your house, man.
That's right. You're not supposed to tell people.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
So we are at our Paseo del Rey podcast studio. So excited about that and being able to do this. Now, you've been a faithful leader in the local church, and God has blessed you. I truly believe He's blessed you, He's guided you, He's developed you, and given you great wisdom and insight to help guide God's people in the local church. Like I said, we want to explore how people who came up in parachurch groups, I also thought about calling it extra church.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a word that you don't find in the Bible. What is this?
Yeah, so parachurch, the idea is that it's a Christian organization that comes alongside the local church to partner with and to bless the local church. But sometimes it gets a little fuzzy about where does the parachurch end and where does the local church begin? So, like I said, we'd like to have a conversation about how people who grew up as disciples, as followers of Jesus in ministries like YoungLife, Navigators, Youth for Christ. There's a lot of parachurch ministries out there. How can people like me? That was really my experience. How can we be more effective at being part of the local church and integrating disciple making in that setting? I want to ask you, just to get us started, why do you think that kind of partnership is so important?
Why do I think the partnership is important? Well, I do think one of the benefits of parachurch ministries, and we can talk more clearly about this, and I would like to get over to this, is we need to have a healthy understanding of what the church is, according to Scripture, of what it's called to be, how it's supposed to function, not what it presently is in our modern American expression of that, like if you say church, there's a picture that a lot of us have in mind, and I don't think it's all that biblical. And so if you have an actual biblical definition of picture, and even as a pastor, this is something I've wrestled with deeply, of what is church, what am I called to devote myself to doing as a pastor, as caring, as discipling, as teaching. What are we trying to see built up here? And a church is not an organization. It's not a business. It's not a building. It's not a big service. The calling isn't to try to get as many people to wave the flag of this church. It's to make disciples. But the heart of that is that the actual community itself and how it functions is how disciples are made. And it's a vital part of the disciple-making process. And I say that to say, like, I think of Ephesians, I think probably gives one of the best pictures of this. And if you'll remember the book of Ephesians, one of the things he's dealing with there is the diversity of the church in Ephesus, and that you have Jews and you have Gentiles, and they're not getting along. And he could have specialized his ministry down into a specific group and really said, hey, you know what? To make disciples of Jews, we're going to do it this way. To make disciples of Gentiles, we're going to do it this way. Instead, in Ephesians, you see him saying, no, actually, this is part of it. It is the diversity that we're all brought from different walks of life. And in Ephesians 3, he actually says that God is revealing the mystery of his will through the ecclesia, through the church, which is this multi-generation. It's where he goes through there's neither Greek nor Jew, male nor female, slave nor free. It's not a specialized, it is the conglomerate of all of this brought together, that, man, it is actually the tension of those relationships that's going to make discipleship so important. So our racial backgrounds and our different cultural backgrounds, I have to learn to practice grace and grow in Christ likeness. And anyway, that picture of this multi-generational, multiracial community, not a people sitting and watching a stage, but doing life together, hearing truth, begins to shape discipleship. Having said that, I do think there are specialized needs that are unique to within communities. So for a military community, a church, because it's so multifaceted, can really, particularly one our size, that we don't have the resources just to pour into military ministry. How do we help make disciples to the unique challenges that maybe military men and women face? Or you think about teenagers and specific things they face, or how do we get? And so I think because of that, those specialized areas, the parachurch ministries have begun to exist. Hey, we will specialize in this community or within this way. And it could either be for good or bad reasons, in that either the church doesn't have the ability or the church has neglected the focus on something. So I think the church has become specialized in how to run Sunday services, and I'm speaking very in general, but we have not really focused on making disciples. We assume those two things are the one and the same. So then you have a specialized ministry like Into the Harvest that focuses on building disciples that pop up. So it's I guess filling in a need so to speak. But then the great challenge that begins to wrestle with is, hey, this is a specialized need within a larger community.
Yeah.
How do we help that fit back into the larger community and exist not in tension, but in support of one another? And you know, I think that's hard. I know that's a whole lot. I'm just wrestling with all of that out loud, I think.
Yeah. Well, let me just pull one thread out of that. And I think, again, from my experience and many conversations, I know a lot of folks who, let's say they go into the military or they go off to college and Jesus really gets a hold of their life. And maybe they're part of a collegiate ministry and they get this passion for following Jesus and they want to share their faith and they want to make disciples. They graduate, they move off, they start their career, they get involved in a local church. And to your point, there just isn't that focus or vision for disciple making in the church. So the church is gathering faithfully, good things are happening, but this person who had this experience in college is now in this local church setting, and oftentimes they end up frustrated, or they end up trying to bring something that, rather than being welcomed, it may even rock the boat and cause problems in that local church. So we want to get to that, but let me just talk to our listening audience right now and say, I'd love to hear from you guys. Like, what are some of the opportunities for those of you who have experienced this? What are some of the opportunities that you've seen about, bringing your background and this vision for disciple making into a local church setting? And what are some of the challenges that you've come up against? I'd love to hear from as many of you as possible so that we can begin to think together about what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and how we can overcome those. And we're going to try to talk about that as well today.
Yeah, I love what you said, that the vision they found frustrating because there wasn't a robust vision in whatever local church setting. And I have had that same conversation. I have wrestled with pastoring. How do you have a more robust vision for discipleship making? And I think at the core of it, one of the things that Parachurch does so well, if it's a healthy parachurch, is that they raise up leaders. And at the core, like, they really believe that all of you are capable, that if you mature, to then turn around and help minister to others. And the local church is not built that way. How we have allowed it was supposed to be built that way. Like, if you look back to the original church and in the New Testament church, of to each a manifestation of the Spirit is given. We each play a function in the body. We each have giftings. There's certain giftings are not higher than other giftings. You have this whole picture of the priesthood of all believers, and they were all engaged in this together. You can go back and trace, maybe it goes all the way back to the early stages of the formalization, Constantinianism, and when the church began to formulate around a stage and a building. And what begins to happen is, instead of the priesthood of all believers, you have a priest.
Yeah.
That in
Literally.
Literally. And in Protestantism, we don't use that language, but you have a pastor.
But the model is there.
And the model is there. And so instead of everyone is gifted for this shared vision of making disciples to Jesus Christ, you have a few. Yeah. And their gifts are elevated, and we all come and observe. And I'm speaking as a preacher. Mm. And I'm saying that model is fundamentally broken, in that it doesn't give a robust vision to somebody to say, hey, you have a place and a gifting and your calling to make God known. And so we have to change that, how we're functioning within the local church. And I think that's one of the powerful ways that, if a church can be humble enough to receive that, and are not threatened by, hey, we may not have the biggest Sunday service, but we are going to have a more robust shared vision and enabling towards discipleship making, then I think that's one of the beautiful ways that a parachurch can come alongside and say, hey, we can help you train up leaders, give a methodology, share that vision with you and build that up, that it's not just, you all got to be preachers. No, you can sit down and have coffee with somebody and share Jesus. Here's how you do that. And you should be doing that.
Yeah, I think we get into trouble when our understanding of church is two-dimensional. And this is something that we're working on right now. And what I would describe a two-dimensional understanding of church as is, we reduce church down to the Sunday service, the sermon, and the singing. And these things that happen during this brief period of time on one day, we think of that as church. And what we're working on and trusting the Lord for at Paseo del Rey is to really grow as a three-dimensional church, which goes beyond Sunday. We're church 24/7, 7 days a week. And we're the church because we're the people of God who belong to him, who are joined together, who are learning to follow Jesus and grow into his image together. And that's what it means to be the church. And a part of that is we gather together weekly at a set time in a set aside place, and we learn together. You know, you're a gifted teacher, but it goes much beyond that. But let me take us just to kind of set the table for this conversation. I wanted to have this conversation, and actually this was John Snyder's idea for you and I to sit down and talk.
I'll thank John later, yeah.
Yeah, because he said, you know, what you and Shelton are experiencing right now is pretty unique, you know, given your backgrounds, given where the Lord has taken you over the years, and to be able to partner together in a local church is pretty special. And I have to say, I really agree. I really see our friendship, and I see what God's doing here at Paseo as a God thing. It's not something that you and I planned or coordinated. We're kind of figuring it out as we go. But let's just share with folks briefly, like, our origin story.
Yeah.
You want to share how we met and how that all started?
Because of my addiction to coffee, and you're enabling other young leaders. So I moved here in 2018, and I had been a discipleship pastor at a much larger church, multi-thousand people church, a multi-site church. And I was one of the lead teaching pastors and the discipleship pastor there. And I found, you know, I learned a lot through all of that. Moved out here in 2018 purposefully, and by God's direction in so many neat ways. And Paseo is just a total different style church and what I had been in, and I was so excited about that. But I was in Arkansas. Now I'm in California. I don't know any other. I have no networking out here whatsoever in the South, in Texas and in Arkansas. I had networking. I had folks that I knew. We ran into. This was all new to me out here. I wasn't worried about that. I felt like God would provide that, but I didn't know what that would look like. And so in the early stages, man, very early on, I was down at a local coffee shop just working on my sermon. And I was still so new to San Diego. I didn't know how many believers were around. In the South, they kind of had this view of, like, we're the holy place, and, you know, California is lost and there are no believers. What are you doing out there? And I kind of came in with that, like, man, I am and I look over and I see two guys with a Bible open at this coffee shop, and my heart just leapt inside of me of, cool. I would see that regularly.
Yeah.
In the town where I was in Fort Smith, Arkansas. That was a new experience for me, and I was new here. So just went over and, like, hey, I'm a pastor. Who are you? What's going on? And I think I forget who you were meeting with. Do you remember who you were
Ryan
meeting?
Bailey. So
Yeah,
Ryan, if you're
yeah.
watching this, you were there at the very beginning of this connection. I would just encourage folks, this is a great reason to meet in public with those that you're encouraging and sharing the faith with, and have a physical Bible. A lot of times, you know, we have our Bibles on our phones, and that's great. But there is a witness that happens just by opening a Bible and sharing with folks in public spaces. And you never know.
Encouraging experience, man.
Yeah, for every person that's willing, has the confidence and the ability to walk up and introduce themselves, I think that there are any number of others who see it and are one way or another influenced by that. So now I have to tell people, though, you had a pirate patch on when I first met you. Yeah, you had I still don't remember exactly.
I had a detached retina. Yeah, you want to know a great way to start a church? like months into pastoring this church.
Yeah, I
got a detached retina. Went completely blind in my eye. Had to get emergency surgery, and then I had to preach for the next 3 months with a pirate patch on my.
So you can tell that Shelton, he's not a shy man. He's definitely willing to put himself out there. But yeah, I saw this giant man with a pirate patch introducing himself. But that really, was our first connection. And then we began to connect just one-to-one. At the time, we were part of a home church. I was leading that. You were leading Paseo del Rey, but new to the area. I didn't know that initially. And so at first, us getting together was really just to get to know one another. We would pray together. We would pray about what the Lord was doing and the challenges that we were facing. And it really did start as a friendship with no strings attached, no plans or strategies. And I don't know, I'm going to be careful not to draw principles from this that everyone should try to incorporate, but I do think that it's important. The idea of friendship, I think, is important. We don't just want to come into a local church and accomplish a mission. We want to come in and be known and be a part of that family of faith. And that's really the number one way the church is described.
Well, back then there was no vision of you even coming in. And this was where I would take friendship. I agree with what you just said. God had been working in my heart back in Fort Smith. One of the neat things he had been doing in my heart is to stop seeing other youth groups, other churches as competition.
Right.
But as comrades and as brethren for the same goal. And so, and I had a great friend, Aaron, who was a youth pastor in that town, and we just began. He reached out. He started. It wasn't me. He was him. He's like, we need to be friends. We began inviting other youth pastors in on this. This was early 2013 or so, and it really began to grow on me. Like, if the things we could do. So we started doing joint worship services and joint discipleship efforts, all these youth groups together. Here's my wife got a letter just this week from a former student of hers. She's a school teacher who was brand new Christian, got invited by my wife to that first, we call it a collective, this joint effort. And the collection, we read this week how much that began to impact her way back when, because all the sense of competition was off. I wouldn't plan on saying that, but that was such a pivotal point. It convinced me of the importance of kingdom friendships, and so much within Parachurch, other churches we see as competitions, which is just as ungodly as could be. Absolutely. Right? So to truly say, hey, I'm thankful that I got to meet somebody else. Like at that point, it wasn't, I need to get you to my church. I need to do, like, it was just like, you have your hand to the same plow. Mm-hmm. We need to be friends. And that's important to see, that the plow is not my church. Mm-hmm. The plow is making disciples for the glory of Jesus Christ to follow him. That's the plow that we're all pushing against. And once we can get out of the plow is not, I've got to make more Navigators, or I've got to make more Into the Harvest people, or I've got to make more whatever it is. But it is this bigger picture of the kingdom. Then we can begin to make space for these friendships that man, it blossomed. We actually brought the world. You can blame us for COVID.
Yeah, we did. That's another part of our origin story. Because pretty early on. We met, I think, just before Christmas, at the end of 2019.
Okay.
And pretty early on, you suggested that we take a trip up to San Francisco together. This was really early on into our friendship. Go to Francis Chan's home church. We are a church there in San Francisco, and they were running a sort of a multi-day training event where you could come in and just kind of see what they were doing in the city. Just so happened that our slot was early March of 2020.
Yeah.
In San Francisco.
Yeah. Yeah. We didn't know anything was wrong.
Nope.
We had a blast.
We did.
We learned a lot. Some of that we can pull into here. I valued so much. Yeah. A lot of that is that church does not have to look like the brick and mortar church that we're used to. It comes in all kinds of shapes and sizes. But there are things that are biblical callings that a church needs to be. A church needs to raise up elders. You need overseers. You need to be fit a biblical model of the church. And I think that's something parachurches, when they begin to exist outside of biblical models, you have no God, like 1 Timothy 3 list of elders, overseers, that you got to wrestle with that of, hey, right. we need to be obedient. Learned a lot of that. we go to the airport to fly home. I remember this because the Oklahoma City Thunder and Denver Nuggets were playing a basketball game. We went to a baskeball game. We watched the Golden State Warriors play up there.
Yes.
Turns
the night
out-
before.
The night before. Turns out that was the last game they played. I remember being at the airport in San Francisco. We were watching the beginning, or like this game's about to start. We take off. We land in San Diego, which is not a long flight. We get off, and on the TV in San Diego was the entire game got shut down.
And the
NBA game
canceled the season for the rest of the season.
While we were in the air. We broke the world. It was us.
We did. But that also points to, for the next 2 years, we were navigating COVID and leading churches, in my case, a much smaller church, but in California, the rule was you can't have more than 10 people in a building at one time. So you're wrestling with, okay, well, even though we were a home church, we had more than 10 people. So how do we do this? And and you were leading a much larger church that was trying to navigate that. So it was great to have a friend who was, experiencing a similar challenge, even if it was in a different context. If I spin it forward for Cindy and I, at the end of 2022, we had been leading a house church for 9-10 years at that point, and that season came to an end. We closed our home church, and we had begun to consider: do we start another house church or something else? And at that point, we had been leading in ministry for 20 plus years. I think we were both feeling pretty tired and worn down. And so we decided that we would take, I don't know if a sabbatical is the right word, but we would take a pause and we would just start coming out to Paseo on Sundays for a season. There was really no intent to go beyond that. But, we had been friends for years. I think I may have actually even shared at Paseo once or twice, but I had never just come as a congregant or as someone who was just showing up. So that was a new experience for us, and it resulted, after several months being there and praying, we felt that the Lord wanted us to be a part of this family. And that's one of the things that I think is special about being part of the church, is that we're called to depth. We're called to commitment, mutual commitment with other members, and that's special. We waited about a year before becoming members, and part of that was we wanted to make sure that, Lord, if this is where you're calling us, if this is the community, the family of faith you want us to be a part of, then we're going to be all in. And became members in early 2023 and have been involved since then. So I think one thing that drew me to Paseo, and you've already mentioned several of those factors, but one, I believe our church is very kingdom-minded. So even though we understand that the Lord has entrusted to us a certain scope of influence and responsibility here in Chula Vista and beyond, we also realize that we're just one part of a much bigger family of faith. And so the desire to partner and champion and help other churches that are getting started, or other missions here in San Diego, like the Rescue Mission, support missionaries who are with lots of different organizations around the world. All of that is part of our work. And like you said, it's not a threat to us. But also the community that is here, and the desire to know one another and to grow together. So for those of you who are part of Paseo who are watching this, Cindy and I are very grateful for you all, and for being a part of this family, and for being on this journey together. Now, so that sort of brings us up to the present, unless you want to add anything to that. I think our situation is unique, and I wanted this to be helpful to people watching, not just us rehashing our story. Someone asked me this recently, and they said, well, Shelton's in his 40s, and he's not a brand new pastor, and for whatever reason, he's secure as a leader, so he's not threatened. And he's got this mindset of, let's bless the world, let's help everyone thrive in Christ. And you are 50, you're not young. And of
Wow.
course, yeah. And that affects it. Like our relationship looks a certain way, whereas if we had met when I was 30 and you were 20, or 35 and you were 25, that dynamic would have been different. And a lot of those watching now, that's where they're at. They're in their late 20s. They've grown up in a collegiate ministry or in a military ministry, and they're trying to figure out how to take what they've learned into a local church and partner and be a blessing. Do you have any advice from the standpoint of a pastor or a leader in that local church of what you would hope for from someone who was mature and had some background, who was coming into the church and wanted to bless the church, but also had a pretty strong sense of how they wanted to contribute?
Yeah, you can always feel, and that happens a lot, actually. So, folks come and they're attending and they've got something they're very passionate about and they feel like the whole church needs to be behind it. And I can appreciate that. But you can feel when somebody is just trying to sell you on an agenda. There is a humility that comes when someone just says, hey, I just want to glorify the Lord together. Let's explore together, different ways of how that could happen. That is huge to me. You're not coming in with an agenda that's different than just the glory of Jesus, and you have a sense of comfort in that. If I can sense, hey, you have your finger on what the real vision is here. The real vision is to make disciples, and maybe you have a methodology of that is very comfortable to you, but it's not that you are trying to champion the methodology. You're trying to champion the making of disciples. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if somebody comes and they're like, hey, we got to do this methodology. This is the only way it works.
Yeah.
Immediately my defenses go up because I think that's awfully prideful.
Right.
To say there's one way to make discipleship. We've been at this so long that I've done so many with different success, different models, different methodologies. There's not one way there's not a magic bullet of how to make disciples. It is Jesus and relationships and truth and the Holy Spirit all in this thing. And maybe I shouldn't say that but even with Into the Harvest, it's one of the things I appreciate of, hey, there are tools that we could use, but ultimately there's not a cookie cutter approach to this thing. And there shouldn't be, because no two communities, no two people are exactly the like, but the gospel is truth and we're going to apply it. So my advice would be that humility and a shared love for the glory of Jesus and a genuine sense of love for one another. The curiosity, I think, of, I want to know you. I want to know who you are. I want to be a part of this. When somebody comes in and they're really just worried about elevating their platform of their ministry, they're not very curious to know other people. They are not very vulnerable with other people. I'm not going to give that person a place of leadership.
Right.
Because those are values that, like, your skills are secondary to me than to your character and love for Christ and the church.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And so that's what I'm feeling out more than anything.
Yeah, there's a few things that come to my mind, even as you were sharing there. One I think is you should be praying and asking the Lord to guide you to a church where He would want you to root yourself and begin to serve and work alongside the leadership of that church, but also the members of that church. So I would say, start with prayer. Don't just church shop for a place where you could plug in and keep doing what you've been doing, but really a desire to become part of that family of faith. I do think that there are things you should look for in a church.
Yeah.
And this is we're going to actually do a future episode where we talk about how to church shop. So that's
important.
Be on the lookout for that, because I don't think you just show up at any church and try to make it work. I do think that there are some things so again, like one reason why we were so encouraged by Paseo was that we saw those ingredients. We saw godly leadership. We saw a desire to see God's people grow and mature, a security, not a protectiveness. But also, we do vet. We don't just let anyone come in and lead the sheep. So you want that. And that kind of leads me to the second thing that I would say. So first, pray and be on the lookout for a church where the Lord would want you to join and make those contributions. But the second is take the time to be known. So don't, even though you may have a clear vision of what you want to accomplish, I think one thing that you said is, when people show up with an agenda, that comes out sooner or later, usually sooner. Now, you can have a desire to bring what you've learned to this church and be a blessing in that. But when you come with an agenda, that's a different animal. So you can have a desire, but don't come with an agenda. Ask God to allow you to become known, trusted, and part of this community before you really start trying to lead. And that was part of our story. I know you were encouraging me, hey, I know you need rest. But, God has taught you some things. He's gifted you in some ways and would love to have you step into more of that. And part of my desire was, one, we do need rest, but two, I want to be known by this family of faith before I just start trying to lead. And I'm still getting to know, we have several hundred folks. So,
and that's one thing I would caution pastors and pastors feel this often themselves, but they're bad at doing it for others. And that is, people are more than what they can do for you. They're people.
Yeah.
Right. So, right away I saw that you have a certain set of gifts and a passion and all those abilities that I could plug in and put to work at the church, and it would benefit Paseo, all these things. But to reduce you down to those and not see you as a person and as a friend, as a husband and a wife that needs some rest and all those things, I would never want to be treated that way. I've been treated that way in ministry. My only value was what I could do.
It's almost like that agenda from the other side.
Yes, churches certainly have. Oh, you're a leader, because we're so hungry to see leaders, because frankly, we're bad at developing leaders. Mm-hmm. So when we see an already developed leader, we're like, yes, let me plug that person in right away. And we don't give them the chance to grow into the church, to really be grafted in before you expect them to handle the weight of fruit out on the limb. And so what often happens is you're wanting fruit right away, and they've never fully been grafted. And so then you're shocked when they break off, and you're like, I don't know what happened there. Yeah. Well, they're not a part of the root yet of all that is happening. So, I do think what we have is unique and special. I long to see it within the kingdom, and I can't wait for the episode on how to church shop.
I'll probably pick your brain on that one too. But we've got some ideas.
Good. I would love to know that, because even for me, I've pastored in lots of different settings, and there are things that make a healthy church.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say that. It's okay to say that. And you need to have a robust vision for what a healthy church is.
Yeah.
And if you can't find it in your community, that's something to say out loud.
Right.
And then I would love to maybe have a follow-up conversation. What do you do if you cannot find what you think is a healthy church?
That would be good. So we're telling you to find it in this episode, but you'll have to wait until we really parse that out. But I think we've already given you some ideas. A church that is really focused on Jesus, kingdom-minded, secure, isn't just pushing their agenda. And as you allow yourself to become known, and as you build those relationships, is there freedom to contribute and to use your giftings and your background? Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes there's just a real controlling spirit in a church that's going to say it has to be done exactly this way by these people.
I would say that to parachurch ministries and churches alike, of whose banner are you waving?
Right.
Is it your church's banner? We're amazing. We're special. Mm-hmm. Is it your ministry's banner? That you want to just replicate more of that, build up, see it like franchising. I need to grow out and do all this. Or is it the glory of Jesus? Like, I just long to see Jesus glorified and lives transformed. And if that truly is the banner, I felt that a long time. I grew up in a specific denomination. And as a young pastor that went to that denominations, I was Baptist. And so I went to a Baptist university, I went to a Baptist seminary, and I felt the pressure to wave the Baptist banner so much, to play, and it burnt me out. I'm like, this is not life-giving. This does not, like, who cares? Like, I have that theology of Baptist theology. There's a lot of it that is in me. I'm appreciative. I don't mean to be disrespectful to that and the history that is there, but I do think there's a problem. And in today's model of the mega churches and the big churches and churches almost operating like this, I have often said when I have been wrong as a pastor, it's because I was driven more by a spirit of entrepreneurship than I was by the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to grow a big church or grow a business. And it wasn't about seeing the fruit of the Spirit in my life and in the life of others and to see the glory. It was about growing this thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we can do that in all kinds of ministries. And so I would caution when you are church shopping or when you're operating and you're entering into a church, do they wave the banner of the glory of Jesus? Is that really what they're after? And is that what you're after? Or are you just really trying to push your agenda and it's the banner of your methodology or of you trying to prove yourself? And you've used the word secure a lot. And I think that matters. I think you're secure in who you are. I'm secure in who I am, but I have not always been that way. And if the majority of your audience is in their late 20s to early 30s, in those years of my life, I was trying to prove myself so much. I had to convince somebody in my mind that I was an expert and they should listen to me. Mm-hmm. And those are some of my worst discipleship making years because I wasn't operating in the confidence of who Jesus is and who he's made me to be. Mm-hmm. My weaknesses I felt as threats, and so I tried to hide them instead of just being vulnerable and real about them. And that's part of my own journey. I assume it is for you as well, of just being, if I'm trying to prove myself to others, then I am not making disciples of Jesus. I'm more focused on myself. And so as a young 20 to 30-year-old disciple maker, you have to get to that point of being secure in who you are in Christ. Yes. Thankful for that. Yeah. And then you can operate in all kinds of areas.
Yeah, and there's a related side to that I want to share with folks to this idea of being secure or growing in your security, because I do think this is something that, most of us, we start off in life and we don't have that sense of security. You and I have that because we've gone through that process. We've gone through those years and God's been shaping and chipping away at us. And we've had others that have helped us walk that journey. But like you said, if you're in your late 20s, mid 20s, early 30s, just realize that that's part of what the Lord is wanting to shape in you, is just an ability to trust him, to become secure in him. And if you pray and you find a church that has that Christ-centered, kingdom-focused mindset and spirit, and they're allowing you to grow and mature, that's great. I would say that once you're in there, part of what you need to be learning is the story that Jesus tells of, if you haven't been faithful with that which belongs to someone else, who will entrust you with something of your own? And I think that when you're coming into a church, you're entering into an existing family of faith. There's leadership that's already in place. There are already things that they're trying to accomplish. And if it's a healthy church, these are things that they're trusting the Lord for, and you're entering into that. So you've got your experiences and you've got your desires, and you want to make disciples under the umbrella of that leadership in that church, but you want to learn how to become part of accomplishing what the Lord Jesus is doing in that church. And that's a big part of it. You can't just be there to do your ministry. When you become part of a church, which all of us, I believe, should be, we're part of a family. And what is God doing in this family? And how do I need to be a part of that? How does my ministry fit in that? And I've told you this, I'll say it publicly here. I believe that the Lord has me here to help you accomplish what the Lord has put before you. So there's strengths and experiences and giftings that I bring to that. And I'm not just waiting for you to tell me what to do, but I'm not trying to do something in parallel with you. I believe that the Lord wants me to be serving under your leadership. and doing my part to help us as a church move in the direction that the Lord has for us. So I say that to someone who's in their late 20s and early 30s, but I also want to live that in my 50s because I think this is how the church grows and how the Lord leads us.
I love that. And what I want everybody to hear in that is the security and the humility of that. Because I would say the same thing of not in my leadership, I feel like I'm under the leadership of the elders and there is a joint. I need people that I submit myself to. If somebody comes across as cocky, as prideful, the reality, if they don't have humility, is probably that they're insecure. Right. You really can begin to find the security of somebody when they're comfortable with being humble. And it's not a false humility. It's a, hey, whatever I can do, you let me know. And how do we go there? Here, they know that. That is something we got to grow into. And as pastors, oftentimes, if we're not careful, our insecurities can come to the forefront like crazy. And we can do a whole episode on that. I would love to, how our own self-focus is so detrimental to the glory of Jesus in this world. And so when we can let go of that, it's huge. And that's been a journey for me. So I just love it. I hear the flip side of security and humility walking together. So security is not the same as cockiness. And sometimes when you're a young leader, particularly if you're coming, a lot of your guys are coming out of the military world, right? Like you have a very specific picture of strong leadership. Here is what strong leadership is. And I would advocate is do not look to the world for what strong leadership is. Look to Jesus Christ. There was no greater, stronger leader than that. And I'm not trying, I think within the military, it takes a certain type of leader. I'm not trying to demean any of that. But if you are entering into the kingdom of God to operate for his glory, Jesus rebutted every opportunity they tried to make him a militaristic or a kingdom leader. And he maintained a humility and a gentleness that was evident to all in how he operated. And I would say that what I've heard a lot of times for young guys coming out of that world is if they don't hear articulated from me this like strong, hard, militaristic language leadership, then I must not be vision driven. And I must not have a strong leadership ethic of what that looks like. And which I grieve that. There have been seasons where I've had to really step back and measure before the Lord or with my elders of, hey, am I leading? Am I wrong in this? Because these military guys it's not always been military, but there has been a common thread there. So, but if where I've grown in that is, I think I need to articulate more clearly what the vision is, in that we're following Jesus, we're making disciples of Jesus. There's both our methodology of how we do that in terms of helping people fall in love with Jesus and the end goal. It's all Jesus. It's all coming towards him. How do I articulate that regularly as a leader without having to venture over into this hard? So I can just see how if you're coming out of a certain world and you're entering into a church and you're not hearing this hard, or you're not seeing, or maybe you do and you like that at first, I would just caution. We have a lot. There's been a lot of examples of pastors that have had that style of bravado, and it doesn't end well. And so just caution what you're looking for on leadership, what type of leader you are called to be. It's always Jesus. We need to be modeling Jesus.
Well, we wanted to have this conversation because I do think, especially from my background, coming up in the Navigators, the military, chapel program, and that culture, and even within the Harvest, we know that a lot of you that are benefiting from the podcast, the resources, you may not be part of a local church now, but many of you are going to become part of a local church, or you're trying to figure out how to bring all that God has taught you into a local church setting, and we want to see you thrive. We'll share some takeaways here,
and let's get quickly into the nuts and bolts of this. Of most churches, and I love your language. I'm going to use your language. Of most churches will have their Sunday service. That first dimension is where the main focus is going to be. Then there's that second level of small group gathering. Nearly every church will have that. For us, we call that growth groups. Now, you should be analyzing what is happening within growth group. Is it actual discipleship forming? What are they doing in that? Is there actual relationship building? There's always ways to go there. What you have brought in your experience with Navigators and others is this third level of one-to-one or 1 to 2 small, tiny, that third dimension of discipleship. And most churches don't have that. Right. And that's been my experience for years and years and years. And trying my previous church, we tried to bring that about. How do we start that? How do we get that going? I think for a lot of your leaders, if you're asking and you're going to measure, don't be disappointed when you go and you see a church and they don't have that third level. It's not, a lot of times it's not because they don't desire that. They don't know how to do that. And all of their leaders have been developed to hold these two dimensions. And it might be that God is bringing you into that church. So if you judge those first two dimensions, you go, that's healthy. Yeah. Maybe what God is showing you as somebody that has a one-to-one discipleship heart and background, like he has for you, as, I have something I can bring here and help develop up this one-to-one on the third dimension. And so I would encourage the Into the Harvest folk people of, that's a power. Then you become this 3D church, to use your language that I love, that you're making disciples all the way through. And all of those have great value in how you do that, but it takes great vision. As a pastor, it takes just about all the effort I have to have vision for Sunday morning and all of our ministries that are out there. Yeah. It is such a blessing to have somebody that says, I got it. And I want to help develop at this third dimension. How do we do that? And then how do I empower you to do that? And so it'd be an encouragement. I think that's where we're headed. And I'm thrilled to death about it. I long to see that for other churches as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up here at the end, because we've talked a lot about the relationship, the friendship, but we are partnering, and this is what we believe the Lord has entrusted to us here at Paseo, to begin to see ourselves as a three-dimensional church and to really begin to grow into the full expression of what God wants us to be as a church, just in terms of how we're connecting with one another, how we're growing. And those are the three dimensions. We're really workshopping this right now in real time this year. So we've already got, we'll be checking back in with you later in 2025, just to give you an update on how things are going here locally with Paseo Del Rey. But you're right. That is how we see it. We've got our Sunday first dimension, second dimension is our growth groups. The third dimension is that one-to-one personal disciple making piece. And for many of you, that's what you're bringing. So that'd be a good way to kind of wrap it up. Find a church that values that and wants to see that happening. I mean, if you come to a church where that's not either understood or even there's not even a desire to see that happening, then you probably need to keep looking for a different church. But I would say the flip side as well, realize that that's not the only dimension, and that's not in itself where disciples get made. Disciples get made in community. And so we need those other two dimensions. Sometimes people with my background can have a strong value for that third tier, but not really appreciate the value of the other things. And so you want to be appreciated, but you need to appreciate what God is doing in those other dimensions. That's a significant part of helping people grow into maturity in Christ.
And let me speak to that real quickly, because in my church growing up, I never had that one-to-one. And I had this crisis. I had a little bit of it when I got to college, a little bit of it. Wasn't in the church, but I had this crisis of once I came to think of discipleship only as this one-to-one. Like that's what it means to be discipled. That then I thought, I've never been discipled. How can I pastor if I've never been discipled? The Lord did this wonderful work in my heart is, what is discipleship? Discipleship, and you have a great definition of this, but it's essentially learning to follow Jesus, to become like Jesus, obeying all the things that he's commanded us, right? And I looked back and saying, it's the shaping into Jesus. And I realized, while I never had that one-to-one, I have had such rich community with, and I've never had somebody say, let's sit down and I'm going to disciple you. But man, I had godly mentors that I learned about what it looked like to be a godly husband through some older men in my church when I was 19 years old, 20 years old. And I'm just over at Paul's house and he's cooking dinner for his family and I'm just observing it in. And this older couple takes a young college kid in and it's one of the most beautiful church thing that could be. I'm watching and I'm observing as somebody that came from a divorced family. That was huge for me, and I needed that. When I became a dad and I was nervous if I don't know what it looks like to be a godly dad, I realized I looked up like God had put godly dads in my church friendships where I am being shaped around that. When I was a young pastor and I didn't know like how do I minister to people? How do I and walk in the Spirit and some of those things? I just realized, hey, there were a plethora of godly men that they just invited me to start praying with them on a 5:30 in the morning on Wednesday mornings. And I began to meet with these guys. They're like 70, 80 years old. I'm 23 years old, 24 years old, my first pastorate. And they would not say, we're discipling our pastor.
Right.
But I realized they're not. The Lord is discipling me through this shaping community. And once I changed my definition of what is discipleship out of a particular method, like it's this one-to-one, but it's into becoming like Jesus, then I began to see, the Lord has been discipling me for a long time and he's used a lot of other people. Having said that, can the one-to-one be such a value? Would I have benefited if somebody came along the way back when? Would it have accelerated and said, hey, I want to help you grow in this. How do we help this one? Absolutely. I would have loved that and needed that at stages in my life. But that is to speak to what you were talking about earlier. Don't have the hubris to walk in and say discipleship is only one-to-one. That is demeaning what the Lord has been doing in people's lives in the broader community, and also demeaning what God can do in your life, that if you've only spent time with other 25 to 35-year-old men, right, you have a small view of what it looks like to be a godly man. You need elders in your life. Does that make sense? It's the diversity of that. And frankly, you need young little boys that you can be passing it down to as well and same with women. I'm just using my example of that. So anyway, I love that. I think that one-to-one needs to be brought into the church, but not to the diminishing of any of the other dimensions. It is that full picture that is absolutely needed.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're working on. I'm excited about it. I think the Lord, again, has brought us together. And like I said, we're workshopping this. So if you're interested in following along with that journey, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel here. Turn on the notifications because we'll be checking in and talking about these kinds of conversations. We also have a bi-weekly newsletter called Harvest Highlights. If you would like to get signed up for that, you can stay in touch with us that way. And again, talk to us in the comments about what are some of the challenges that you face, or if we didn't quite scratch the itch on this topic of making disciples in the local church, what would you like to see us discuss in future conversations? And we'll do that.
I'd also offer this, and we didn't talk about this at all. If somebody's watching and you're wanting some coaching on how to navigate within a local church setting yourself, I would be happy to sit down or to visit and have some type of coaching of how do you navigate this with the pastor, or if you are a pastor, I don't, for whatever that's worth, of reach out to us. Like I would be happy to walk through how to help build within a local church. What we're experiencing.
You can reach out to us at info@intotheharvest.org, and we'll make sure that Shelton sees that. We're seeing each other every week, all week. So Shelton, thanks again for coming on. I know this won't be our only time that we get together on the podcast here in 2025, but really appreciate you, brother.
Happy.